The P.
Really bothering Mikey Garcia because he's putting up that left hand, trying to block it, but he can't block it. When he's trying to block it, you know, Earl Spence is coming in with that left.
Welcome to the motherfucking ring, baby. We're covering today's top boxing
news. Kubrat Pulev versus Pulev-Dinu. Let's talk about the fight. You know, this was a heavyweight interim fight that went largely under the radar, it being that it didn't involve one of the three major names in the heavyweight division. One of the three names that you often hear about whenever that weight class comes up. It didn't involve a Wilder or a Fury or a Joshua, but it still yielded an overall pleasing aesthetic. There was actually some seesaw action in this fight. For the most part, it went exactly as I predicted. For those of you that are interested in that prediction video, I'll leave the link to that in the description box. Let's talk about what we saw. You know, Kubrat Pulev, being the seasoned, experienced veteran that he is, he fights with a sense of poise. I mean, this is a guy that can be economic at times. This is a guy that doesn't always go out there and throw a whole lot of punches. It's for this reason I think that Dinu had a bit of success early in the fight. Early in the fight, Dino's looking sharp, using his jab, using his movement, even throwing some body attacks. Pulev-Dinu is a guy who I said in previous videos that this guy has the glimmer of what could be a solid contender if he weren't a part-time boxer. I really think that's what's holding him back, that when you're dividing your time between two professions, in Pulev-Dinu's case, being a part-time boxer and a member of the Romanian SWAT team on the police force over there, you're never going to quite be at 100%. If you're a part-time boxer attempting to make a statement against full-time boxers, and that's just, it's not going to work out, that maybe you can have some success early in a fight, but as the fight wears on, the longer it goes on, the more the chances are you're going to fade down the stretch. I believe that's what we saw here. Pulev-Dinu was having success early in this fight, which is more or less what I anticipated. With that deceptive hand speed that he's got, good movement and good coordination for a man that size.
He's big.
Because there was a visible height advantage between Bogdan and Kubrat. You know, I figured that Bogdan maybe makes things interesting in the early goings of the fight, the first quarter. And he did that. He opened up a nasty cut over Kubrat Pulev's left eye. Pulev-Dinu, being the taller, more statuesque fighter in the fight, was able to connect with several overhand rights in the fourth round. And one of these overhand rights split open the skin just above Kubrat Pulev's eye, and it was a pretty nasty cut. You could see that this is the kind of cut that's going to get the ringside doc's attention. This is the kind of cut that could get the fight stopped. But I'll tell you that after that fourth round, Kubrat Pulev came alive. Kubrat Pulev started fighting with a sense of urgency, because he's got to know this fight could get away from you behind that cut, so you need to hit the gas. You need to do something. You need to take charge, take control, and take back this fight, and that's exactly what he did. We saw Kubrat Pulev start connecting with very hard, straight punches.
Breaking down Dinu.
Putting that veteran jab of his to good use, and this proved to be more than Pulev-Dinu was equipped to deal with. That once Kubrat Pulev started acting like the full-time fighter against the part-time fighter, the dynamic of the fight completely changed, and little by little, Pulev-Dinu didn't want to be there anymore. That Kubrat Pulev, once he went on the attack, there was very little that Pulev-Dinu could do about it. Kubrat scored 3 knockdowns in this fight. Interesting knockdown when Kubrat had the point deducted for what appeared to be a shot that sailed to the back of Dinu's head. Myself, I didn't agree with that call. It being that it was more Dinu's fault that that shot ended up where it did than Kubrat. You know, Kubrat's throwing punches. He's in the heat of the battle, whereas Dinu is putting his head in a position where it's available for that to happen. It's not like Kubrat was trying to pull a fast one on the ref and rabbit punch this guy. It's more along the lines of he was in the heat of action, he was in the heat of the exchange, and it was really Dinu's motions, you know, his position, and how he was attempting to deal with that barrage of punches from Pulev. The fact that he was angling his head and his torso in that way, that's what made it available for a punch to sail there. So, you know, it is what it is. I didn't necessarily agree with the call, but I didn't lose sleep over it either because it didn't really affect the outcome of the fight. Dinu got more than ample time and opportunity to recover from the shot, to regain his composure, and, when the fight started again, he still wasn't able to deal with Kubrat. So, nothing unexpected. This is more or less what I thought would happen. I just figured that since Pulev is at times a very economic and poised fighter, a fighter that doesn't always go for the knockout,
Not always.
that the conservative prediction would have to be Pulev on points. But he went out there and he really asserted himself in what was his Top Rank / ESPN debut. So I think that anybody that happened to catch this fight and tune in, I think they got a very pleasing aesthetic, because this proved to be more entertaining than I thought it was going to be. Now, one thing that the paying public and the people at home might not have been aware of upon viewing this fight is this isn't the first time that Kubrat Pulev and Pulev-Dinu have swapped punches. These two have met each other before. Back in 2007 in Romania, Pulev did manage to defeat Pulev-Dinu, and it appears that nothing's really changed now that they're both professionals. But Kubrat Pulev, funnily enough, in spite of
Being in line for AJ.
being in prime position to square off against Anthony Joshua, the money man of the division, in spite of being in prime position via the IBF, who we all know takes their mandates very seriously, in spite of that, before the fight, before the Dinu fight, Pulev was quoted as saying that he wants to face Oscar Rivas. The same Oscar Rivas who we saw dispatch Bryant Jennings very recently. The same Oscar Rivas that is on the top-ranked side of the street, along with Kubrat Pulev. It just so happens that these two guys have history. Back in 2008 at the Beijing Olympics, it just so happens that Oscar Rivas decisioned Kubrat Pulev. And Kubrat Pulev went as far as saying that it's something that bothers him to this day, and he wants revenge. Now, this was before the Dinu fight. This was leading up to the Dinu fight. But you have to wonder, is he willing to gamble his mandatory position, which would give him a shot at Anthony Joshua? Is he willing to gamble that to exact revenge on Oscar Rivas in a fight that he could lose? You have to wonder. It's a very interesting angle of what's happening here, because, on one end of it, it being that both Pulev and Rivas are on the same side of the street, there are no cross-promotional, cross-network issues, so it's an easier fight to make. But the fight for the biggest value, the best bang for your buck fight, would have to be the Anthony Joshua fight. But with that fight, there are some obstacles. We know that as far as in the United States, Anthony Joshua is on DAZN. And the only way you're going to get this guy to fight on some other platform is if this thing goes to a purse bid and, let's say, Top Rank wins the purse bid. But in a bidding war, who's to say that the people over there at DAZN won't pull out all the stops to make sure that that guy stays on that side of the street for that fight? Lots of interesting angles when it comes to this, because, Pulev being the IBF mandatory challenger, it's only a matter of time before they order that fight. And if these guys can't reach agreeable terms, or if one side or both sides push for a purse bid, it's in the air as far as who would air the fight. You understand? Where would you see the fight? Would you see it on ESPN, or would you see it on DAZN? And if by some chance it does end up on ESPN, how would they air that fight? Would they air it on regular ESPN? Would they decide to put it on a pay-per-view? How would they
Decide to do it.
negotiate and finagle that kind of a situation? There are some very interesting tidbits to come in the coming months. Not sure if, now that Pulev's dispatched Dinu, got him out of the way, not sure if he still wants to fight Oscar Rivas. What we know is that he said that before the fight, and if he keeps that same energy, the Anthony Joshua situation, well, that's just going to have to wait. But it's interesting because, Pulev's in prime position for a money fight. He is. Is he willing to put that to the side? Is he willing to gamble that, all for the sake of revenge against Oscar Rivas?
Not sure.
And Pulev did say that he is asking Top Rank for that Oscar Rivas fight. That's what he said ahead of this Dinu fight, that he's asking them to make that fight. So you hypothesize that Pulev is saying he wants the fight, and for Oscar Rivas, there's actually an incentive there, that if you decide to take on Kubrat Pulev, now that you're both pros, it's not just, some old grudge match kind of situation. Pulev is the IBF mandatory. So in fighting him, you could get the opportunity to face Anthony Joshua. I'm sure that's the kind of fight that a guy like Rivas wants. I'm sure that that's the kind of fight that he is building towards. That Oscar Kaboom Rivas might actually be willing to rematch Kubrat Pulev for a shot at Anthony Joshua. So I definitely see an avenue for that fight to happen. In the case of Pulev versus Joshua, I've never quite felt a sense of urgency from Kubrat Pulev to make that fight. Call me crazy, that's just one man's opinion. Rest assured, this is just my opinion. But I've never really felt the same kind of sense of urgency for Pulev to fight Joshua that Povetkin displayed. That when it was Povetkin, you really felt like that's a fight that he wanted. You felt like he wanted to be there. He wanted that fight. Whereas with Pulev, I'm not so sure. I don't quite feel that. I don't really think he's adequately communicating that that's an important fight to him. Because look at what he's willing to do. You know, he gambled his mandatory position against Pulev-Dinu, and now it sounds like he's willing to gamble it against Oscar Rivas as well. At this point, you could sit on your hands and simply wait for the IBF to order the fight, but Pulev is choosing to fight on. He is looking at other options, alternatives, and that kind of communicates to me that maybe he wants to do other things before it even comes to that. It's not like this is the first time he found himself in the IBF Mando spot before. He's had that spot before. The fight didn't happen for one reason or another. I believe there was an injury associated with it or something like that, but I just never felt that sense of urgency from Pulev that I felt from Povetkin to face Joshua. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'll tell you that it's chancy that if you are in a prime position, like Pulev's in a prime position, to fight Anthony Joshua, who we all know is the money man of the weight class, it's kind of chancy to gamble that for something as nominal as revenge. Revenge from the amateur days? I mean, you know, we'll see what happens. And now in welterweight news, it appears that veteran legend, Manny Pacquiao, has left the name of Errol Spence off his list of potential opponents for late June or early July. It being that Manny looks to return in late June or early July when his Senate obligations won't be a problem, and, you know, he's in the market for an opponent. He took to Twitter and posted a poll that featured a couple of names. But on that poll, the name of Errol Spence was not listed. That's a very dry way of saying that, look, that guy's not in the running. You understand? That is not a potential opponent option. To some people, that might come as a surprise because Manny Pacquiao was in attendance for Errol Spence's recent fight with Mikey Garcia. But you know, leading up to that fight, when that news broke, that Manny was going to be in attendance, that he might show up to that fight, watch it, see what's going on, I was of the opinion that he wasn't really there scouting Spence. He was there scouting Mikey in the event that Mikey were to have won the fight. But we all know how it went. Mikey didn't win the fight. I kind of thought that, you know, maybe Errol's an option because Errol's hot right now. A lot of people are talking about him. He was just on a pay-per-view. I kind of thought that maybe he's an option, but a part of me felt that if Manny is in attendance for this fight, it's not Errol that he's scouting. He's scouting Mikey, and he's there in the event that Mikey Garcia wins that fight. That is a much more appealing option for Manny Pacquiao at this stage in his career. Now, we all know how the fight went, and we all know what's going on right now, that apparently Errol Spence just isn't in the running for that fight. So you can imagine how Errol Spence's fans are receiving this news. They're giving you the run-of-the-mill reactions that you expect from those fanboys, that, oh man, he's ducking, he doesn't want any smoke with Spence. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, Manny Pacquiao's got one of the most accomplished careers that you can hope to have. I mean, I'm not even a fan of this guy, but even I can admit that this guy's about as accomplished as you can hope to be. And he's at a stage where he doesn't really owe anybody anything, and he doesn't have anything left to prove. So if he decides to pass on Spence, I'm of the opinion that he's well within his rights to do so. It's more or less the same thing that Terrence Crawford said in regards to the situation between him and Manny, that Manny's at a stage where he can pick and choose. He's earned that right, doesn't owe anybody anything, and it's up to him. If he wants to fight, he wants to fight. If he don't want to fight, he don't want to fight. That was in regards to their situation. I just find it funny because a lot of people the last couple of weeks and months, they've been trying to say that if Manny and Crawford didn't fight, it was Bob Arum's fault, that Bob blocked that fight, when that's not what Freddie Roach said. What Freddie Roach said is that Bob Arum was pushing for that Crawford and Pacquiao fight, and if you paid attention to a lot of the news reports and the quotes from Team Pacquiao, it was Team Pacquiao that was not interested in fighting Crawford. Bob might have wanted that fight for Crawford so that he could become a crossover pay-per-view star, but Manny's team were the ones who weren't interested in it, and here we see something very similar. That Errol Spence and Errol Spence's fans, they might want him to become a crossover star by having a passing of the torch fight with Manny Pacquiao. But as far as Pacquiao and his team are concerned, that's not an appealing option. They're not interested in it, because if they were, they would have featured him as one of the options as far as who his fans want to see him fight next. Now on the poll, You know, the name of Floyd Mayweather was obviously there because we know Manny wants that fight, and we know that his fans would very much like to see him avenge that loss. So, you know, he came in the lead as far as whose fans want to see him fight. I don't know how likely that is. Floyd really does look like he's retired. It really does look like he is not interested in boxing anymore. He's more concerned with racking up massive paydays for exhibition fights. He doesn't look like he's interested in a Pacquiao rematch. Not that he needs one. And then there was the name of Keith Thurman, a more likely option given some of the things that Freddie Roach said. Freddie Roach said it in plain fucking English, that if they can't get Floyd Mayweather in the ring, they'd like to fight Keith Thurman. He said this already, and I don't know if you guys missed it, but he said this already. And I have no doubts that Keith Thurman being on the rebound and looking the way that he looked against Josecito Lopez, I have no doubts that that has a lot to do with why they'd rather go with him than going with Errol Spence. That, you know, Keith Thurman looked very vulnerable in his last fight. And what do they say? You're only as good as your last fight. Keith didn't look too hot in his last fight, so that might have something to do with why they want to pick him. But just as well, Keith Thurman holds the full version of the WBA title. So this is, you know, that fight would be an opportunity for Manny Pacquiao to be able to once again call himself a full-fledged champion. I know that his fans, they think that that belt that he's holding right now is the real version of that title, and it's not. That's a baby belt that he's got. Keefy holds the real version of that title. So you can see the rhyme and the reason as to why they'd want to go that route, that Keith looks vulnerable, he's holding a full version of a title. It makes more sense to them, and at the same time, they want to stage Manny's next fight as a pay-per-view, you understand. So they have to conjure up an opponent that can actually drum up interest. I think people would pay to see Thurman versus Pacquiao. I think people would be interested in seeing that situation, maybe more so than Thurman versus Broner. You know, maybe they could do better numbers with a fight like that. But what we're going to address here is Spence's fanboys. That they swore up and down, oh, it was Bob that blocked the fight. No, it wasn't Bob. Bob was pushing for it, and Roach attested to that way back when. You guys just weren't paying attention. You wanted to run with a narrative that, I don't know what, Bob is protecting Crawford. You know, don't be ridiculous. Don't be naive. We see what's going on there. And it's the same thing that's going on here with Spence. That Manny Pacquiao is not back for these young guys to try to cross over on him. Manny Pacquiao is still lingering around the sport of boxing because he wants to rack up a couple of paydays before he calls it a career. But if a Spence fight isn't happening or a Crawford fight didn't happen, that's mostly because Manny's not interested in those guys. The ball is in his court to make those kinds of fights happen because he's the marquee fighter, he's the veteran, he is the obvious A-side in both of those situations. So the final decision to make those fights happen really rests with Manny, not with them and not with anybody else. And if Manny don't want them fights because he's not interested, you could call it a duck, you could say he's well within his rights, you could call it whatever the fuck you want. But if those fights aren't happening, it's because Manny Pacquiao's not interested in them happening. And no, I don't think he owes it to anybody. I don't think he owes it to me, you, Spence, or Crawford. But I'm just saying, assign the blame where the blame belongs. If those fights aren't happening, it's because Manny and his team don't want them to happen. It's more or less what Mike Kopinger tweeted very recently, that the expectation is Manny won't fight Spence. He might go with Thurman, which I don't even think is a bad fight anyway. It's a pretty good opponent. It is a young undefeated champion for Manny, so it's nothing to sneeze at. And that might see Spence fighting Porter, which I don't mind because I think that, a lot of people like to say Spence is the best welterweight. Why doesn't he fight some of the best welterweights before you go crowning him for it? So I don't mind those situations. Let's see what happens. Let Errol Spence fight and beat these guys before you go acting like he's already done that.